Hey friends, SGT here. I'm always thrilled when our good friend James Turk, the founder of GoldMoney, can join us. James, welcome.
Thank you, Sean. It's always a pleasure to speak with you.
Well, thanks for taking the time. I know you're in Spain, and I want to talk to you about the ECB and life in Spain. But the first thing I wanted to do is talk to you about the huge moves we saw in both gold and silver prior to the Fed's announcement of QE3. And just as Gatta's Bill Murphy predicted, huge moves in August and the run-up in September. And you wrote recently, this breakout in gold and silver is very important historically, not only because it signifies the next leg up in the metals, but also it signifies the next leg in the destruction of fiat money. Can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, what we really have to be prepared for and recognize is that the system that we've used for 4 decades, currency backed by nothing except government promises, what it's done is it's created what I call a fiat currency bubble. And, bubbles always eventually pop, and so will the fiat currency bubble pop. And when it does, you're just going to see the precious metals, gold and silver, just continuing to rise as people exit paper and move into the precious metals. We've seen this happen dozens of times since the end of the Second World War as various currencies around the world have collapsed. We saw it before the Second World War in places like Weimar Germany. But, we saw it in Zimbabwe just a few years ago, Argentina back in the 1990s, a number of Latin American countries in the 1980s, Serbia, mid-1990s. What happens is when you have this break in confidence in promises, people move to the safety of precious metals, and that's what I'm expecting to have happen when the dollar, people eventually recognizes that the dollar is being destroyed. The purchasing power of the dollar is being eroded day by day.
Well, I want to talk to you about QE3, but first I think we ought to talk about Draghi's announcement of sterilized bond purchases. You're located in Spain. Tell us what life is like in Spain before and now after this Draghi announcement and what it means for the folks in Spain and for the folks throughout the Eurozone.
It's really interesting what Mr. Draghi is proposing. He's basically debasing the euro. What he's going to do is sell bonds of presumably German bonds and Dutch bonds and Finnish bonds, bonds of countries that have a high credit rating, and buy the bonds of Spain, Italy, and maybe other countries that don't have the same credit rating. What he calls this a sterilization. So he's not actually increasing the money supply. What he's doing is changing the nature of the ECB's balance sheet. And what he's doing is debasing the euro. It's like altering the content of a silver coin or a gold coin by mixing some copper into it. But it's not done in the form of a coin. It's done in the form of a balance sheet. But when you take out good quality assets and bring in poor quality assets, it's the same thing as taking out the gold and putting in the copper of a coin. And that's basically what the ECB is doing. The other thing is so foolhardy is he thinks that, or at least he's trying to make the market believe that, he can control interest rates simply by buying paper. The reality is the market is bigger than any government, central bank, or group of central banks, or group of governments. And if the market believes that Spanish paper is not worth the quality that Mr. Draghi does, they will just sell it, and interest rates in Spanish paper will continue to rise. So we just had, even though the purchases were made, the Spanish interest rates did come down temporarily, but now they're back on the rise again. They're not up near that 7% level yet, but I expect that to happen in the not-too-distant future.
Well, I think it's just all horrifying, and for those of us that have been expecting for some time that the collapse was really baked into the cake. All of this most recent announcement out of the ECB and out of the Fed is just so troubling. Our good friend Andy Hoffman wrote in a recent rant, and I just want to quote part of this for you. He says, "I'm writing this rant nearly in tears, and I'm not kidding. The Fed has announced overt QE3, no ifs, ands, or buts, and the fuse on the keg representing the time to protect yourself has been lit. shortly to explode. I'm just so troubled by this, James, because I'm surrounded still by folks, decent folks, intelligent folks, educated people who still don't get the big picture. They don't understand how insidious this is and that it really does spell doom for our way of life and for the U.S. dollar. Can you please expand upon that and impress upon people how important it is that they pay attention?
First with regard to Andy's rant, he's absolutely right. And the interesting thing, though, Sean, is that Mr. Bernanke and Mr. Draghi and all of the other central banks of the world are following mainstream economics. They're doing what the economists are telling them to do. Unfortunately, the economic theories that are being pursued are, totally bogus, and ultimately are going to be proven to be completely wrong, because what happens is that when you create too much money, you ultimately destroy the currency. With regard to the point that you were raising, we've been through this once before in the 1970s. There was generations of people who just assumed that the dollar was going to maintain its purchasing power. And eventually, you woke up to the fact that inflation was a problem and you had to take action to protect yourself. And of course, one of the best ways to do that is to buy physical gold and physical silver. And the prices of both gold and silver rose dramatically in the 1970s as the dollar's purchasing power was inflated away. But think about what happened back in 1980, 1979, 1981. Mr. Volcker, who is the chairman of the Federal Reserve, raised interest rates. The prime rate went up to 21%. Government paper was 15%. The real interest rate, which is the interest rate you earn less the amount of inflation, was 6 or 7%, which was phenomenal. And he convinced the market that the dollar was going to be preserved and its purchasing power would be saved. Mr. Bernanke is doing the exact opposite. He's keeping interest rates near zero. And there's a reason for it. Back in the 70s, the U.S. was the largest creditor nation in the world. Now we're the largest debtor nation in the world. And those debts are just getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The U.S. government can't afford a 6 or 7% or even a 4% interest rate because of the expense that it's incurring on this huge $16 trillion debt, which is growing by $1.5 trillion every year. That's the compounding effect from interest. So what Mr. Bernanke is trying to do is to see if he can get the economy jump-started with low interest rates by printing all of this money in the anticipation that if the economy is jump-started, federal government tax revenue will increase. The only way that the spending problem is going to be solved is if we go back to constitutional principles and back the money with gold or silver. It's basically history repeating. The first currency of the country was the continental, and it collapsed because there was no discipline on government spending, which was the Confederation at the time. The government formed under the Articles of Confederation. And one of the reasons why the framers created the Constitution in order to create a more perfect union was to create a common market with a common currency. And that's why they put gold and silver in the Constitution and did not allow the creation of bills of credit, which is what was the term that they used for what's happening today in terms of the nature of currency backed by nothing except, government promises. So, it looks like we're heading for a train wreck. And so, people have to recognize that. And as they see, price of gold and silver rising, price of goods and services, price of food, rising, they have to go out and educate themselves. First, to understand what's happening, and second, how to protect themselves. And the best way to do that, of course, is to own physical precious metals.
I'm putting the link to part 2 below in the more information section, and it's called Warning, Currency Cliff Dead Ahead, Hyperinflation, $400 silver, and $8,000 gold. James says by 2013 to 2015. Thanks for watching.